The Korean War spanned from 1950 to 1953. In June of 1950, Northern troops invaded the South across the 38th parallel. Truman immediately offered the South support, and in July, the United Nations established a plan to assist with an army of 90% U.S. soldiers. My grandfather, Orville Hartman, grew up on a farm in a small town in western Idaho. He had worked on the family farm from a young age and had already secured his future as a farmer. But his plans came to a halt when he was drafted in June of 1950 to the Korean War. So how did you feel when you were drafted?
Well, obviously, like any young person, you have an empty feeling because you haven't got a clue what the future is for you. And sometimes it's not too good, so there is a lot of concern.
What was your perception of communism?
Well, communism, obviously, if they take over, you lose all your freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and total loss of free enterprise.
President Truman rallied support for the war with the following words.
We know that the cost of freedom is high, but we are determined to preserve our freedom no matter what the cost.
Although my grandfather voted Republican, he agreed with Truman's philosophy. Orville talks about how his family felt when he was drafted into the Korean War.
Actually, they were very concerned about me going, and I can fully understand that, and I was very apprehensive about what my future was. So I know that their biggest concern was the fact that they had already lost a son in a horrible horse riding accident.
Because of my grandfather's experience working on the farm, he landed a spot in the 434th Engineer Battalion. In November, he reported for training in Fort Lewis, Washington, where they were taught basic training, truck driving, and how to assemble floating bridges. When Orville arrived in Korea, he became a machinist for the battalion. The machinist would create scarce parts in a machine workshop that was on top of a truck.
One time we had a pulley that on a big engine on a rock crusher that needed replacing, and we actually took a solid piece of metal and made a two-belt V-belt pulley for the front of an engine.
On May 23, 1952, while stationed in Pusan, North Korean fighters snuck 300 miles past the combat line and ambushed the 434th Engineer Battalion. 5 in the unit were killed and 2 were wounded.
Actually, it's a real shock. You realize how fragile your life is. No civilian can possibly imagine how different the bonds are with your friends than they are where you're home, because when you're in a war zone, your friends become very important to you, because that's all you've got. You don't have family, you don't have anybody with you. So you become really close friends, and you look after one another. And the bad thing about it is that when you lost one of them, it really hurt.
According to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the engineers often were the unsung heroes of the Korean War, for they helped create the environment that allowed the United States and its allies to fight and win.
It takes 100 men to keep one man on the line fighting a war. So the same thing goes with a big construction outfit. We had to have welders, we had to have machinists, we had to have mechanics, and we had to have engineers, and we had to have all kinds of people, and without them, nothing worked.
The 434th Battalion was responsible for much of the construction and repair needed to keep American troops battling. My grandfather's unit received medals of merit.
When we got our commendation, the unit citation for outstanding work and beyond the call of duty. And through that, we rebuilt 350 miles of road and rebuilt bridges, rebuilt railroad sections, and you name it, we did everything.
Although my grandpa's battalion focused on construction, other engineer units concentrated on destroying infrastructure essential to North Korean advancement. Engineers destroyed bridges in order to establish a defensive line. Additionally, in the early months of the war, engineer units faced combat. Luckily, my grandfather's unit never fought as infantry. How did you cope while you were in Korea?
Knew that we had to spend a year in Korea and be whatever it was. We knew we had to do it and just did our job.
The Korean War cost 36,914 American lives. Do you think U.S. involvement was worth it?
At the time when I was in Korea, I really couldn't understand really why we were there. You know, it was kind of a stalemate, and it didn't seem like we were gaining anything. And but then after I got home, it might have taken me a few years, but I finally realized that the Korean War was the only war that we accomplished anything, and from it we developed a very democratic country, and probably the only success story the United States has had since World War II.
Thanks to American efforts, South Korea is an independent, democratic nation. However, over 60 years later, conflict between North and South Korea still exists. Relations between North and South Korea are strained and complicated. Since 1990, South Korea has discovered 4 tunnels built by North Korea, and the Defense Ministry suspects there are up to 20 hidden tunnels. The hope is that the tunnels cannot reach Seoul, which is 25 miles past the demilitarized zone. However, a North Korean military defector revealed that the tunnels do in fact reach Seoul through sewer connections under the U.S. Embassy and the Blue House presidential compound. It would be tragic if the tension between North and South Korea once again escalated to war. Ultimately, how did war shape your character?
Growing up, I was a fairly small boy. I wasn't a big boy, and I think I was very timid. I know I was very timid, and due to that, when you go through school, you're bullied and you're whatnot, you know. Bullies like to pick on somebody small. And so actually what the military did for me, it developed my, well, I got bigger. Actually I grew after I got in the Army. And I went from about 150 pounds to about 175, 80 pounds. And so there was quite a change, and so it makes a lot of difference when you no longer are afraid of anybody.
A man with distinguished character, Orville Hartman received many honors.
Patch here is the Meritorious Unit Citation Patch. This is the Corporal Stripes. This is the 8th Army Patch. This is the Korean Service Medal with 2 bronze campaign stars. This is the United Nations ribbon, and this is the Korea Appreciation ribbon. And this is the engineer. This is the U.S. Army on the other side. This shows the Korean Service Fund.
After a year of service, Orville Hartman was honorably discharged on November 15, 1952. He was then in the Army Reserves for 5 years. On July 27, 1953, the Korean War concluded, and North and South Korea remained divided at the 38th parallel.